Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Santa Barbara County Planning Commission meeting of October 11, 2017. Will you please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning, Mr. Villalobos. If you will call the roll and get us started.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the Commission. Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, and Santa Maria and Orchid areas. Rebroadcasts of Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. on CSB TV, Channel 20. Today's hearing will also be streamed live on CSB TV's website and will be available for download in a day or two. Now for the roll call, Commissioner Blau.
Here.
Commissioner Farini.
Here.
Commissioner St. John.
Here.
And Chair Cooney.
Here.
And for the record, Commissioner Brown is absent today.
Thank you very much. And I see we have Mr. Wilson here who will guide us through the meeting. Do you have the agenda status report and projection report?
Thank you, Chair Cooney. Yes, I do. In regards to the agenda status report, we have two items on the standard agenda. Staff is prepared and here today to present those to the Commission for your review and decision. In moving to the projection report, the next meeting after this one will be on October 25th. And there's a briefing on the Cannabis Land Use Ordinance Amendment and licensing program update that will be presented by Long Range Planning to the Commission at that time. The next meeting will be November 1st. We have three items on that one. We will bring the item back that was continued, the so-called gas advanced meter project will be back. I believe there will be some changes to that project, and we'll be bringing it back to you for your review and consideration at that time. At that meeting, there's also a property line adjustment and then an appeal at that time. What we'd like to talk about on November 8th is the AAC has agreed to that date for November 8th for that joint meeting. However, at this time, we don't have topics from the AAC, and we wanted to check with the Commission today if there was any topics that they would like to have put on the agenda for that meeting. And what we would do is on October 25th, we would finalize the agenda with topics in preparation for the November 8th meeting. So if the Commission, maybe when I get done with the projection report, we can talk about potential topics on the AAC.
Sounds good.
Moving through the projection report, on that November 8th, we do have the Old Town parking lot that we brought to you, as well as a ordinance amendment and project in Los Alamos that's located along Bell Street. December 8th, December 6th, we'll be back with Cannabis Land Use Ordinance Amendments and Licensing Program. The Verizon at Vieja, they have submitted their information and staff is being prepared to present that for your consideration. December 6th, it is showing at about approximately 6 hours. There was a project that isn't on your projection report, which is a subdivision, the Abbott subdivision. We're estimating that the appeal, the Giefer grading appeal, won't take the hour and a half that has been allotted. So we're looking at being able to still be around the 6 hours, but we'll be able to look at those hours as we continue preparing for that date on December 6th. And then December 13th, we have two subdivisions. We have the Oak Hill subdivision in the Lompoc area, as well as Keysite 3 coming before you for decision or review, as well as the guidelines for determining significance for cultural resources has been placed on that agenda as well on December 13th. In December 20th, we had talked about this recently about a joint meeting with the Montecito Planning Commission to talk about the coastal resiliency effort that Long Range Planning is putting together. So that's been placed on the projection report as well. And we're also looking at having the annual Planning Commission holiday luncheon on that date. So clear your calendars for that exciting time. And then we were looking at January 10th, and I think that's good, is coming back to look at the cannabis land use ordinance amendment as well as the Lompoc Stone Vesting Determination Project. So that's where we're at on the projection report up to January 10th.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from commissioners about the projection report? We've talked about most of these matters. But as to Mr. Wilson's questions about matters to put on the AAC agenda, any thoughts at this point? Commissioner Farini? Doesn't appear we have any ideas this morning, but I think what I understood was really an impetus by the commission to meet directly with the Planning Commission in order to discuss their processes and how they get forwarded to us and so forth. I think there have been instances in the past where the AAC recommendations are either not given what that commission feels are its due or are otherwise concerned more procedurally. But there may be substantial issues to discuss as well. Any thoughts from you, Mr. Wilson?
Chair Cooney, thank you. We are currently in discussion with the AAC chair, and we're working on coming up with topics with them. So on that October 25th meeting, we'll be able to finalize the agenda and topics and brief this commission on what is anticipated to be talked about on that November 8th joint meeting. So that's the information I have at this time, Chair.
Okay.
I do have one comment.
Yes, Commissioner Blau.
For me, I'd like to have staff bring forth the more typical items where we're not in sync with the ACC. So, and there are conditions that they typically put on different projects and we don't, for some reason, condition the project that we would like to know why, so we can discuss those with them. The idea, what I'm thinking, is that we want to not have that situation occur in the future. We want to understand why they have certain conditions, or have them understand why we can't create the conditions. So I think it's generated by staff. You can tell us which ones are in conflict.
Okay, anything else on the projection report? Let's move then to public comment. This is the point at each of our meetings where we invite the public to comment on matters not on today's agenda, which would be of interest and within the purview of the Planning Commission. Are there any speaker slips for public comment? Anyone here for public comment as opposed to specifics? Doesn't appear so. Do we have somebody in Santa Barbara watching for us the process down there? Okay, we can come back to that. Oh, there is. Here is our director, which is great. Let's go. Was there anybody for
No speakers
public comment?
for public comment here.
Okay, thank you very much. Planning Commissioner informational reports. Are there any reports from commissioners? Not seeing any here. We'll go to the minutes briefly of our September 27 hearing. Okay, let's hold off on the minutes a second. Why don't you approach and identify yourself?
Hi, my name is Sarah Anaya. I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I did get a notice that there was going to be something on the agenda today in the hearing regarding a development in my neighborhood that I wanted to speak about.
Yes, we have two items that we're going to be dealing with, and it's probably
Okay.
one of those.
And
if
that
you
will be
got notice
later.
about it.
All right, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Minutes of September 27.
I'll move for approval.
The second.
I have some comments that I maybe it's just the way I was reading one of our actions, but if we'll return to Golden Inn and Village Development Plan revision, I'm looking at the revisions on page 5 of our minutes under the heading Project Lighting. And in 4 instances there, I think it's not the best use of language. For example, the second sentence down begins, "The lights located on the second-story northern and eastern-facing common-use balconies, senior apartments, community center building, would be turned off at 9 p.m. Instead of shall be turned off." Then later it talks about lights on the exterior of the senior independent living apartments would include a top lens cap. And would is used 2 more times in that paragraph instead of shall. And I would propose that we substitute shall, which is used a couple of times in the paragraph, so that it's consistent throughout and is mandatory rather than predictive of what the project should have.
And the maker of the motion will agree.
Okay?
Yes, thank you. I agree too.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the minutes of the 27th as amended, and a second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? I think everybody was here. Good. So those minutes are taken care of. So we'll move now to the director's report. Good morning, Dr. Russell.
Good morning, Chair Cooney, Commissioners. Pleasure to be here. There's a few things to mention this morning. In the October 3rd board hearing, there were 2 items, I think, of interest. One was short-term rentals, and the board did act and basically prohibiting short-term rentals, full house short-term rentals in most areas, allowing homestays in residential zones and Ag 1, also establishing an overlay in the coastal zone that would allow short-term rentals there, which may change as new information is brought forward from owners that can demonstrate a historic short-term rental use of their property in the coastal zone. We did that because the Coastal Commission made it clear that you had to allow some sort of short-term rental existence in the coastal zone, but they didn't specify exactly what it was. Generally speaking, the direction that we were given on June 6th was what they adopted, with some minor clarifications that make it clear that if somebody is doing homestays, they can only do it once. They only get one homestay place, so that couldn't have been used as a repetitive loophole to have a number of different homes owned by the same person all doing homestays. The other item of interest on the 3rd was the Community Choice Energy, which was started in planning and development, but it shifted over for the actual feasibility study to community services. And the 3-county model for the Community Choice Energy for the feasibility study showed that it wasn't feasible, that it was more expensive than would be feasible. And so the board questioned whether or not that report needs to be reviewed by a different party, which I think it may get another peer review. But also they directed staff to look for other opportunities for energy-saving type projects that could be supported through the county. On October 10th, yesterday, we let the contract for the hoop structure EIR. RECON, R-E-C-O-N, not to be confused with RINCON, is going to be the firm that's going to do that EIR. Also, the board delegated authority to me to form a joint review panel for the Plains EIR. and those panels used to be formed and approved at the staff level, but a case in, I believe, 2014 about boards of supervisors delegating too much authority without proper safeguards meant that we had to go and formally ask for that delegation, which we did yesterday. And that's going to involve Kern County, San Luis Obispo County, Santa Barbara County will have the lead, the Forest Service, and BLM probably. And so it's going to be quite a mammoth environmental undertaking, to say the least. Also yesterday was the 5-year forecast, which was presented by the Budget Director, Jeff Rapwell, and it showed that our costs are going to be exceeding our revenues as we move forward, increasing every year to a point when it will be in year 5, $50 million or more in excess. Our costs will be $50 million or more in excess of our revenues. Now, that is, of course, a static picture, assuming that you have to have a balanced budget every year. That's not going to happen, but it is a characterization of the challenge that the county will face moving forward over the next 5 years. And also introduced yesterday was something that various people in the department, various managers in the department and other departments have been working on, which is a program out of the CEO's office called Renew 2022. And basically, it's a series of different teams looking at ways to either increase revenue or save money through organizational change. I believe that the big picture here is that the way that county government is going to deliver services is going to change significantly over the next 5 years. And I've been involved in some of those analyses to see if there are opportunities to save general fund, for example, moving forward. There's not that much opportunity in planning and development because we're primarily well over half driven by permit fees, and that doesn't have really very much to do with general fund savings. Coming up, a little preview, on October 17th, we're bringing Article 10 back to the board, and what we're going to do is we're going to basically have an amortization period and then get rid of the legal nonconforming status for medical marijuana grows. The idea here being that in the end we want everybody to be subject to the same set of rules, the as yet to be approved permit process for marijuana, and it would be best if the legal nonconforming status goes away, and so that's going to go away. And in addition, if the board accepts our recommendations, we will be putting in place a process whereby people who believe they are actually legal nonconforming can come forward to the Planning Commission and have that reviewed and determined. Also on the 17th is the Camp 4 agreement. So certainly that's going to be a major hearing item in the afternoon. And then just one note about something that Mr. Wilson mentioned, and that is currently I have targeted the December 6th and 13th Planning Commission hearings for consideration of revised thresholds for cultural resources, CEQA thresholds for cultural resources. And just a brief backstory on that. Those thresholds haven't been revised since 1992, and there have been massive revisions in CEQA relative to the treatment of cultural resources. So ever since I got here, I was hoping to hire a consultant to revise those and bring them up to date. And I realized earlier this year that there wasn't going to be the ability to do that. And so with the assistance of Joyce Gerber, I sat down and I redid them. They're done. They're undergoing peer and expert review right now, and I look forward to bringing them forward for your consideration. And the process involves, as you may remember from the greenhouse gas thresholds, which were the last ones that we did a couple of years ago, the process involves 2 hearings, one in the north and one in the south. So that's what I have this morning for you, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Are there questions from commissioners for Dr. Russell? Very extensive report. Thank you very much. I, for one, am looking forward to the review of the the cultural standards. This is something that has been involved in several important hearings, and going forward, it's going to be great to have your expertise and Ms. Gerber's to draw on. So we'll look forward to those meetings as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think then we're ready to go to item number 1. It looks like staff is ready to go. So let's read that into the record.
The following is a hearing on the request of David Swink, agent for Joe Halsell, owner, to consider case numbers 15 RZN 11 and 15 TRM 4 applications filed on September 30th, 2015, and to adopt the mitigated negative declaration, case number 17 NGD 9, pursuant to the state guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
Commissioners, do we have any ex parte declarations? Commissioner Farini.
Yes, I met with applicant representative David Swank yesterday on site and looked at the property and discussed the plans.
Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, I've had several conversations with Mr. Swank, and in fact, they were actually initiated by me, not by him, so, but I had several, yes.
Anything for you?
Yes, I visited the site yesterday also with Mr. Swank, and he answered a lot of my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner St. John. And I had a phone conversation with Mr. Swank, I believe it was Monday afternoon, fairly brief, about today's hearing. Okay, so I think we're ready to turn to staff. Mr. Tuttle?
Ms. Gerber is going to be.
Okay. Ms. Gerber, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Joyce Gerber, and this case is the Halsell Tract Map and Rezone. This project is a request to rezone and subdivide an approximately 5-acre parcel located in southeast Orcutt. The property is located about half a mile south of East Clark Avenue, between U.S. Highway 101 and State Route 135, at the southern terminus of Deer Hollow Lane. It's part of Key Site B of the Orcutt Community Plan. So this slide shows the project parcel, surrounding land use and zoning, and general access. The surrounding parcels are zoned residential. They vary from 1E1 to 2E1 to planned residential development. And I want to point out Clark Avenue there at the top, where the access would come from, east and west, down Stillwell Road, and then through Mesa Verde via Black Oak Drive, through Vintage Ranch, and then up until our parcel. And we'll look at that more closely in a slide to come. Again, I want to point out Mesa Verde, which is an existing development to the southeast, Vintage Ranch, which is approved but not built, to the south, and Rice Ranch to the west. So this slide shows, go ahead and click, an aerial view of the project site. Again, note Mesa Verde, Rice Ranch, and Vintage Ranch. This really just shows the aerial and how the proposed project ties into all of that. So this slide is a close-up aerial view from June of 2017. And as you can see, the site has been extensively disked. It's also been grazed over the past 20 years. And although the Orcutt Community Plan and aerial imagery from 2002 document coastal scrub habitat covering most of the parcel, the historical photographs show that it was largely cleared of coastal scrub by about 2003. There are only a few individual sage plants on site today, and the current vegetation is mostly disturbed non-native annual grassland. There's some groves of non-native trees. The site contains 8 coast live oaks, some eucalyptus, both individually and in groves, and individual Monterey pine trees, which you can mostly see along the east side of the site. Proposed parcel 1 up in the upper left-hand corner does contain, let's go back. Yeah, there we go. A steep erosional gully, which where development would not be able to occur. Okay. Just slide the little thing up. There you go. So the project is a proposal to amend the county zoning map to rezone 5.74 gross acres from 2E1 residential 2-acre minimum parcel size, to 1E1, residential 1-acre minimum parcel size, and for approval of a tentative tract map to subdivide the parcel into 5 lots of 1.41, 1.11, 1.03, 1.10, and 1.09 gross acres. The 5 single-family lots would be accessed from a new extension of a private drive, Claret Lane, that would connect to Black Oak Drive through a private access agreement across Vintage Ranch to the south. The terminus would be this cul-de-sac you see, from which individual driveways would access the 5 lots. Again, we'll show this in a little more detail in a future slide. The regional drainage basin was not designed to accommodate flows from Key Site B, so the proposed project includes an on-site retention basin, or basins, and we'll get to that a little later too, that would receive flows from the 5 parcels. And right now that basin is located at the north part of the site, right between Lot 1 and 2. The portion of the private drive located within the subdivision and the retention basin or basins would be maintained through a recorded maintenance agreement encumbering the owner of each parcel. Water for future development would be provided by Golden State Water Company through the purchase of 3.92 acre-feet of supplemental water from the City of Santa Maria, and sewer services would be provided by Laguna County Sanitation through proposed new sewer lines. There are a few key issues associated with this project. The first is that Orchid Community Plan Key Site B policies actually suggest that this specific parcel is rezoned to 1E1 if access can be taken from the south. And again, as we mentioned, the coastal scrub habitat identified in the OCP EIR is no longer present on the site. And finally, we have conditioned the project to install the roads that are necessary to access the site and the sewer lines approved within the Vintage Ranch subdivision if they are not yet in place at first development, and just the sewer and roads that would be required for development of this site. So to address these a little more thoroughly, we've mentioned that the proposed project is within the Orchid Community Plan area, which contains 45 key sites. This parcel is one of 23 lots, totaling 78.79 acres, and collectively known in the plan as Key Site B, which is shown here on the left. So you can see the parcel is the southeasternmost parcel in Key Site B. The parcel currently is zoned 2E1. In OCP policy, Key Site B1 actually directs the county to consider redesignating and rezoning this particular parcel to 1E1, as we've said, if access to all new development is provided from the south on Key Site 7. So I'm going to show you here. You can't see it here, but there's actually on the Orchid Community Plan map, it says future access right there, or maybe right there, which would be here. Also, OCP Development Standard Key Site B4 states, quote, if feasible, access to the southern portion of this site, Key Site B, shall be coordinated with and provided through Key Site 7. So consistent with this direction, the proposed project would rezone the parcel to 1E1, subdivide the lot into 5 lots of greater than 1 acre, and provide access from the south. Finally, the left side of this slide shows the habitats on Key Site B as they were identified at the time of this analysis, the Orchid Community Plan analysis. The parcel, as shown on the previous slide, does not have the habitat any longer that was identified during that review because of disking and grazing over the past 20 years. And we have conditioned the project to protect any existing native oaks and specimen trees and to require pre-construction nesting bird and rare plant surveys. I'm sorry you can't see this more clearly. It's pretty washed out, so maybe you can refer to your printed PowerPoints. But as we've discussed, the project would connect to a sewer lift station within and take access through Vintage Ranch. So this slide shows Vintage to the south. You can see I've identified the existing Black Oak Drive on the east here through Mesa Verde, and then access would be taken in through there, up through private Claret Lane, and then extended to the north of Vintage Ranch. This subdivision was approved in January, but the map has not yet recorded, and so development has not yet begun. And for this reason, we conditioned this project, the Halsell project, to require that the applicant complete the necessary sewer and road improvements through Vintage Ranch concurrent with the first residential development on site, if they're not yet in place at that time. The on-site driveway and retention basin or basins must also be completed concurrent with the first development on the site. The easements for public utilities are already in place within Vintage, and finalization of the access easement over the appropriate portion of Vintage in favor of Halsell's tract map is required prior to the Board of Supervisors' decision on this project. While some of the Orchid Community Plan key sites received a high level of environmental review, essentially resulting in a focused EIR for each, Key Site B did not, and so we prepared a mitigated negative declaration for the project. There were no Class 1 impacts identified during the environmental review, and mitigation measures required to reduce potentially significant impacts on aesthetic visual resources, air quality, biological resources, geologic processes, land use noise, public facilities and water resources, and flooding to Class 2, less than significant with mitigation, were accepted by the applicant and are included in the recommended conditions of approval. I also would like to note that all of the applicable mitigation measures from the OCP EIR were retained, although we did revise some of them just for consistency with the standard conditions we use today. The draft MND circulated for a 30-day public review period from July 5th through August 7th, 2017, and we received a single comment letter dated August 9th from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. In response to the comments we received, we revised the MND to include additional information about consultation with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife for the California tiger salamander, and additional information about 3 rare plant species and their potential to occur on site. We also revised the cultural resource section at that time to incorporate the requirements of Assembly Bill 52 and discuss noticing for Native American consultation, which was done for this project, and we did not receive any request to consult under AB 52. There were no mitigation measures identified, and recirculation was not required. The proposed project was thoroughly reviewed for consistency with the applicable policies of the Comprehensive Plan, including the Orchid Community Plan, and as conditioned is consistent with both. The project would also be consistent with the requirements of the Land Use and Development Code and Chapter 1 of the County Code Subdivision Regulations. I do want to note here that the inclusionary housing ordinance does not apply to this project, as it applies to subdivisions that would permit the eventual development of 5 or more net new units, and because this is one parcel being subdivided into 5, it would allow the future development of 4 net new units. So the IHO does not apply in this case. So before I get to the recommendations and procedures, I want to note that there's been some discussion over the last day or two about revisions to the map with regard to the drainage situation. I'd like to let the agent talk about that, and then also note that we have representatives from flood control standing by in Santa Barbara if you do have any questions about that, so maybe we could ask them sooner, let them go back to their work. Also, that flood control provided a revised condition letter, which you have there, which allows the flexibility. Again, Mr. Swank will discuss that further, but it allows the flexibility to provide 5 basins, each on an individual lot, rather than 1 retention basin for the project. The letter allows the project to go either way, and flood is fine with that. So in conclusion, staff recommends that your commission's motion include the following. Recommend that the Board of Supervisors make the required finding for approval of the project, case numbers 15 RZN 11 and 15 TRM 4, including CEQA findings. Recommend that the Board adopt the negative declaration and adopt the mitigation monitoring program contained in the conditions of approval for case 15 TRM 4. Adopt the resolution in attachment D recommending that the Board approve a rezone, changing the zone district on the parcel from 2E1 to 1E1, And finally, recommend that the board approve the case 15 TRM 4, subject to the conditions included as attachment B of the staff report. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I think Mr. Wilder is here, there he is, to answer questions that you might have about the connection to Laguna Sanitation, and again, flood control is here for you too.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Gerber. Wonderful report. Questions for Ms. Gerber? Any? Not seeing any yet. Okay, any questions for flood control at this point, or do you want to hold on?
Actually, I think I should tell you that when I read the staff report initially, and I saw that we had a regional retarding basin, or a shared retarding basin, I didn't see the reason for it. And I called David Swank and said, why are we doing this? I mean, you have to comply with the new stormwater requirements, and it seems like they're kind of a conflict. I mean, stormwater wants you to retard all of your water on site as opposed to a shared basin. And given the fact that these are 1 acre parcels, and also this is not a retarding basin, this is a retention basin, so the water is going to sit there until it percolates down. Well, why do that in a shared basin when the stormwater people want you to do it on your own site? And I'd rather see, 5 depressions in the grass areas than I would see one great big basin at in the end. So I asked Mr. Swank to try and contact flood control to see if they would agree to that, and apparently they have. So unless flood control has some comments relative to my comments, I don't need them. I'm sure Mr. Swank will answer all my questions. And I also see the engineer here. Yeah, so the engineer's here as well. So, Mr. Fry, do I have it about right here?
Good morning, Mr. Fry.
Good morning. I am John Fry, the engineering manager with the Flood Control District, and these questions were brought to our attention. I think last week, the idea of rather than having one central basin serving all 5 proposed lots, breaking down the basins into an individual basis on each lot. In the spirit of wanting to keep this project moving along, we indicated that we're willing to consider that as an option if there are extenuating circumstances that preclude a centralized basin. I will say that our standard approach is a centralized basin, and I may clarify a bit. The design of the basin for the flood control purposes is a detention basin, not necessarily a retention basin. The difference being that a detention basin is just going to slow the water down and release off-site in a lesser discharge, whereas a retention basin is in fact going to hold water until it soaks into the ground. So that's a fundamental difference. And the regional board requirements that have to do with treatment on site, that really speaks back to water quality issues, and I hate to defer to Project Clean Water on that, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to. As these developments come along, it's not untypical for a single basin to try to address both water quality and peak flow mitigation runoff purposes. Makes sense? It's done sometimes. Sometimes the water quality aspects are handled lot by lot. But back to the flood control perspective, our preference really is a single basin. We're willing to consider the individual basins, but the centralized basin is a much more efficient approach from a design standpoint. It's more of a master planned design rather than lot by lot by lot. And in the past, it's always been a concern of mine that when you create lots and then individual homeowners come in and then they are tasked with designing their own basin, seems to put a burden on that future homeowner. Another consideration that crossed my mind as this idea was brought to us was, as Ms. Gerber mentioned, the centralized basin concept was already thoroughly vetted in terms of design adequacy. The individual basins, we have nothing on that other than an idea to make that work. Technically, it probably can be made to work, but we haven't reviewed anything like that yet. So, yes, we did revise our condition letter to consider the individual lot approach, again, in the interest and spirit of moving along. But again, flood control's typical approach and preference is a centralized basin that is overseen by some type of, normally it's a homeowners association. I don't know what this project is going to have set up for that.
So at the current time, flood control's approach is to have the project conditioned to be approved by you without specifying exactly what the end product would be. Is that generally accurate?
That's correct. That's what the revised condition letter that I think we just issued either late yesterday or early today, it leaves the option open.
Okay. Mr. Blau, anything further for Mr. Fry?
No, no more questions. I'll make comment about that when it's time to make comment.
Anything from Commissioner Farini or St. John? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fry. I think we're good for now.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything further on that topic you wanted to add at this point, Ms. Gerber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think just to note that we would like for the actual easements, both for access through Vintage and for whichever drainage configuration is decided upon, to be in place before we take the project to the board, so that they would approve a specific project and then the map would record in that manner.
I have a question for
Commissioner
Mr. Gerber.
Blau.
Yeah. I don't know how you do that. The problem is when you comply with the State Water Clean Water Act, you have to know what the impervious surfaces are, where they're located, and how you're going to handle them. You're not going to be able to do that until you actually have a house that's going to sit there and be designed, because that's part of the process. So I think you just have to condition it such that when they get their approval for a structure or to build anything on there, they're going to have to get Water Quality Control Board, they're going to have to get the flood control's approval, and I don't think it's possible to design that system without having the house be there to design around it. So I think language just that says that you have to get those approvals and you have to provide them should be adequate. You've already got language in here that talks about the amount of water to retain at 7/10 of an acre or 7/10 of a, I think, whatever the calculation is in here. So we know how much water we have to retard for the whole site. We just don't know physically how we're going to convey it around there because we don't have the building sit on the site. So I just don't think that's a condition that the developer could agree to, because it's not one you can do. It would be a monumental waste of time and money to design those at this point in time. And I'll let the applicant address that issue if I'm wrong and he can do it, but I don't think he can.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Blau, we've been pondering this too. I think what we had arrived at to this point is placing general easement areas that would be large enough to accommodate the flows from almost any development on the site.
That I would agree with.
On the map, not the actual design. And so one of the things we requested of flood control, who had a requirement for the design to be finalized prior to map recordation, was to move that prior to zoning clearance issuance to allow that flexibility. So Mr. Swank has provided a draft tentative map that actually shows those easement areas where they could possibly be.
So it's general, but not one that he has to actually design. That's fine.
Correct.
That's not quite what you said, but that I would agree with. Okay, great.
Okay, well, let's hear from the applicant, and we'll pursue this. Obviously, the timing of the improvements is critical to the project. Before you start, Mr. Swank, I just want to be sure that no one has questions for Mr. Wilder of Laguna Sanitation. If not, we can let him get back to work. Nothing. All right, Mr. Wilder, thanks for coming. Mr. Swank.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Good morning. My name is David Swank with Urban Planning Concepts. I'm here representing the landowners Joe and James Hossel. It's great to be here. Thank you, Joyce. A very thorough presentation. So my comments were originally planned to be brief, maybe a little bit longer after our last little thing that happened here in terms of some of the questions in terms of drainage. So the project, as we mentioned, this is the 5.74 acre parcel that's located on the site, located like on here, as Joyce had mentioned. What we do here is this is a small portion of Key Site B. The actual policy that deals with the rezone portion of this property is policy Key Site B1, where it allows for a rezone, assuming that you have a southerly access on the site. That is what we are proposing with the project. We do have a letter originally as part of our completeness determination. The county had asked a letter from Mr. John Martin, who owns the Vintage Ranch project to the south, that he is agreeable to allow access and utility easements across his property. We did get that letter from him. Lately, as we've been going through the process, there has been a request to go ahead and physically record that access utility easement prior to the board approving the project. Mr. Hossel feels that that is valuable for his project, so we are currently pursuing that. Our surveyor is preparing the legal documentation, and we will have that. We are docketed for the board in December, so we will have that for the board prior to the approval. One of the things I would like to mention before we go on, Joyce did point out, this is the map from the Orchid Community Plan that was prepared in the early 90s. This is Key Site B. The original project, when they mapped up, showed an extensive area coming through down to Orchid Creek of coastal sage scrub. The historical photographs show that being largely removed in the very early 2000s. I wanted to be very important to point out that the Hossels did not purchase this property until 2014, so they were not party of that. The historical we've heard on this site is that there has been dry crop farming on the site. There also has been grazing on it, and that's one of the reasons why they're cleared. Also, some of the trees, which were dominated mainly by eucalyptus and pine, or several scattered oaks, had died as a result of the drought. Commissioner St. John was there with me yesterday, and she could see some of the dead pines that are still standing. But we have had several of the trees that have fallen. We did photo document those trees before they fall to show that they were deceased before. So there was no tree removal or anything occurred on this. The site has been left as is in terms of since the Hossels have purchased the property. The other aspects of this project, we have entered into an agreement to purchase water with Golden State per the WADO 2 requirements. So we do have water from Golden State acquired through the city of Santa Maria. And also the original project, when we designed it, we had proposed, because, and I'll show this when we look at the overall maps, the Laguna County sanitation existing lines are located well to the south, or over 750 feet to the south. So our original proposal on this project was to do sewer, which according to the state plumbing code we were allowed to do because of the distance of the sewer lines. The Vintage Ranch project, which this commission approved earlier in the year, had bring sewer closer. So there was, even though we are still far, and even if we came in before them, because of the approved project with this approved locations of sewer lines, the interpretation was that we would be close enough to sewer, so we agreed to go ahead and extend the sewer lines into it, which Mr. Hossel felt would be more valuable for his property in the first place and more environmentally superior. So basically, when we have this property really is basically an urban infill project. We are almost completely surrounded by urban development, and what this does and what we're doing is we're actually enacting what the Orchid Community Plan envisioned for this site as part of Key Site B. They never come out very good, but this is the parcel map as we stated. Claret Lane, which comes through Vintage Ranch, is an approved road location, already approved name, and simply what we're doing, and it's through the Vintage Ranch subdivision, extending that through into this property in conformance with policy Key Site B1. These are the 5 parcels we have located. There is a large barranca that goes down to Orchid Creek here that we actually have development buffers located around, and this is the location of the parcels as we have them. Now, this is the surrounding development. I'll have one slight correction on Joyce's presentation. The neighborhood here, this is the existing Stubblefield residential development. Here's our site here. We have Jensen's Crossing, other elements, Harp Springs located to the north. We have the existing Mesa Verde subdivision here. We have Vintage Ranch was an approved project, and we have Rice Ranch located down here. Currently, these, which are the Meadows and the Groves subdivisions, now are currently in the process of moving forward with their building permits now through Coastal Community Builders. So they are currently in the process of getting ready to develop these. So we are literally a site surrounded by urban development. We did get a comment letter from California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and one of the things they wanted to point out is that our parcel, we are not located within tiger salamander metapopulation area or their potential areas. That's located slightly to the south, but the ponds that they were discussing are located down approximately 700 to 800 feet south of Rice Ranch, but our site is located where there's 2 existing developments are going to be eventually built out. So we will be having extensive residential development located between us and the tiger salamander habitat. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has given the opinion that this is not an issue to them, so they're not involved, but California Fish and Wildlife would at least like us to do a consultation with them prior to any building permits, and that process will start fairly soon. They're not requesting any kind of habitat conservation plan. That's through the federal nexus, but they're probably going to want just to review. Their big concern is our site. Even though our site is virtually devoid of undergrowth, our biological study stated that there are several sensitive plant species that are located in the general area. So we are conditioned that we'll be doing, prior to any development that occurs on the site, that there will be surveys for those species during their flowering season. These are some site photos for those who haven't been out on the site. It is a flat site. It's pretty barren. If you look to the south, this is our property here. That line of vegetation you see here, that's the property line between us and Vintage Ranch. Vintage Ranch, the approved project, is located to the south, so that's all we're Vintage Ranch. So eventually this will all be gone with the exception of the open space area that is going by that tributary to Orchid Creek. We're closer up looking at it. Coming through here where this dead pine is, this is where that main drive will come in through this site. So we'll be missing these trees, will be preserved, but it'll be coming through located here. This is now located east. You can see the existing Mesa Verde subdivision here. And then we have right on the other side of these roads is where Jensen's Crossings is, which is another existing. And then we have several home sites that are located along that site too as well. Okay, this is actually should be saying west, but this is located west. Our property line is in that tree line. And then if you can look as we zoom in where these existing poles are, shows you the age of the Stubblefield development. They still have above ground utilities, but that's where the Stubblefield subdivision is located as well. And then looking to the north, the property line, we have existing residential development, single-family homes to the north of us. And then where you can see that white car right there, that's where the existing driveway connection, that's the one we will not be using for access. We will access to the south, but there's an existing driveway that services these homes that's located on that site. This is showing a closer up of that barranca, which is located to the extreme north. It's basically just a big canyon that goes down to Orchid Creek. And then this is the existing drive that currently services this site that comes in from heading in. It's quite a convoluted way to get down here, but it's an existing, it's about a 16-foot driveway. There's a little bridge that goes across Orchid Creek. That is being reserved as an emergency access. Fire department is not requiring any improvements to it, but that will be closed off to access for the residents. They will not be permitted to go that way. It's only for emergency vehicles as a secondary access, and actually it's a benefit to Vintage Ranch as well, because it's an alternate way. If for some reason Black Oak Drive is blocked off, it's another way for the fire department to get into there. It's environmentally superior to go south. This road would have to be significantly widened. We would have to tear out the existing bridge because it doesn't meet the residential standards for private roads, which would require a lot of impact to Orchid Creek, which is red-legged frog habitat. So going southerly helps us to not have to do those impacts too as well. As Joyce had mentioned, there has been a lot of going back and forth lately. Commissioner Blau was right in his review of looking at, is there a better way to be able to do drainage on this site? The existing basin that we originally proposed does require us to take some trees out. There are some oaks that are going to be impacted. So, you know, what we are looking at, because of the size of these, is to do the LID requirements on each individual parcel. Our communications with Mr. Fry and his folks said that that is feasible. He had told us originally that they could support that, but we would have to engineer that, and we would have to make sure that that would work. Joyce did put some flexibility into some condition revisions that are in front of you. That gives us a flexibility to do either or at time of development. The easements can encompass the either or, so I think that we're fine for that. So there are conditions you have in front of you, 4, 5, 12, 19, and 27, that speak of the basin. So there's some very subtle changes in those condition languages that staff has agreed to as well, that gives us that flexibility to go either way. Because this is a zoned E1 site, there are no improvement plans associated. No development plan is associated with either an R1 or an E1, such as you get with the design residential, the small lot plan development, the PRDs. So all of these are timed not with recordation like normally. As you know, we would bring improvement plans in a DR or an SLP because development is known at that time. There is a development plan associated with the map. With the E1 and R1, that is not appropriate. So these are now timed, and the flood control letter timed some elements they had with recordation now to the zoning clearance. So the other thing is talking about CC&R notifications. Because this is only 5 lots, an HOA is not appropriate for a 5-lot subdivision because there's not that many homes. So there is going to be a recorded maintenance agreement with enforcement provisions through zoning enforcement and the courts that people will have to abide when they purchase the property, and there's necessary notice to property owners that will be reflected in the title reports as well, that they will have to comply with the maintenance provisions. And it's mainly dealing with that short stint of access road. There's elements of the sewer line that would have to be shared maintenance among the five parcels. So as part of the FCD condition letter for flood control, you do see revisions where they've shifted that timing. They also had a bonding measure in the original letter, but flood control no longer bonds for improvements. They rely on the grading bond, so they eliminated that requirement too as well. And as I mentioned with the E1, there's no improvement plan, so we appropriately time everything with the zoning clearance and the building permits. Now, in talking about these elements of doing on-site areas, typically, and before I forget, I do have Russ Garrison, my civil engineer, here from Bethel Engineering. So if you have any design questions on how we would accommodate that, he could answer those. He could also, if you have any questions about the sewer line and how we're working the sewer line with the easements, he could answer those questions for you as well. So Russ had prepared this exhibit. So this area here, these are the individual parcels, and how we would accommodate any necessary easements. These colored areas are areas where he, looking at the topograph of the area, of the topography, these would be the logical areas where an on-site LID detention could occur to be able to allow for this to happen per lot. An interesting note is this area here. This is actually the original retention basin located right here. So what we would do is actually just have one for each parcel in the same place. So it's kind of incumbent that that easement we originally talked about stays in place, because it would just be in favor for both parcels. And what we would do as part of the map that we have to do with the necessary if you recommend this to the Board of Supervisors, we would actually have these located with access easements in favor of flood control on these areas if they ever had to be on the site. So that will be on the final map for recordation and reflected properly in the agreements and in the title report. So that's how we would accommodate that as part of recording of the map. Because that is my presentation. I'm available for any questions you may have. I can also bring Russ if you have any questions on sewer lines or drainage easements or anything. But we have discussed these with the staff. They said they're perfectly, these are engineering questions, so engineering questions are always solvable if you have enough fortitude to do it. So we think that we are on solid ground here. And if you have any questions, so feel free to answer them.
Okay, questions for Mr. Swank? Not seeing to be. Commissioner St. John?
I have one on the emergency access road, the little road with the bridge. How would that be blocked off or the use of it discouraged?
Commissioner Cooney, Commissioner St. John, typically what fire department requires us to put is a collapsible bollard or some other device where at the fire department it could be a Knox box that they could access with a gate. It could be numerous things. Usually, typically the fire department tells us what they want there and then we just build it.
Okay, thank you. And well, I could switch over to staff after. Thank you.
How is the existing access road reached from the location of the lots? Is it just to the edge of the subdivision, or is it does it go beyond that?
Commissioner Cooney, what it does, I don't have an exhibit that shows on top. In fact, maybe would it be best if I go back to the aerial of the site? I may be able to see it from here. So you can see here, it comes up here and it actually terminates here into this person's drive circle. And then right now, this currently is just dirt right here. So what we could do is put an all-weather surface if we had to, if the fire department required it. This is paved coming up to here. And then it would just go to here and then terminate right here at the property line.
But where is it running now?
It currently goes, as you can see it right here, and it terminates right here at this person's drive circle. And then it comes down here, I forgot the name of the road, but it's paved all the way up, goes through some neighborhoods to Clark Avenue.
I'm sorry, I'm not being clear. Is it actually physically located on the subject property at this time?
Commissioner Cooney, no, it's not. It terminates right here. Oh, excuse me. I understand your question now. There is access easement, an existing access easement for this parcel to access this road. So it does exist.
But it doesn't go on to the parcel. That is, when you showed the slide of the pavement running alongside a white fence, that's not on this property. Is that correct?
Commissioner Cooney, the pavement is not, but the easement carries all the way through.
I understand. Yeah, no, I was looking at the physical.
Yeah, no, the pavement ends right there. So we would have to put something right there, but we have the access easement to allow that. And that access easement is in the title report.
Okay, so if for some reason, as you hypothesize, the access from Black Road is blocked off and you're trying to get an emergency vehicle in there, at this point, once you get to the actual subject property, there's nothing improved. They just drive on to the yard of that northernmost parcel.
Commissioner Cooney, that is correct. Vintage Ranch does not have an access. It wasn't a requirement of their project, but we know fire trucks, if they've got to, they can do it. And the good thing is there's enough room in there that if it was a truly emergency, we had a wildfire burning really bad down here, the fire department would just go over the property and they would be able to do that. All they have to do is be able to get, our cul-de-sac terminates right here, so they'll come along and just get it right in here, so they'd be able to. We just know that I know in talking with the fire department, they didn't bring this up. It's just something that we noticed on there, and then they would have the availability to do that. So it's extreme emergency. It wasn't required for Vintage Ranch, but we recognize how fire departments work, and they would have the physical ability to do that if they really had to.
So not to drill too deep on this, but I'm not understanding what we're conditioning your project to do with respect to this emergency access.
Commissioner Cooney, there is no requirement for that. We just recognize the fire department could possibly do that, and I was just pointing it out as that is a sort of unofficial added benefit for the community in that area, that they can be able to be able to access directly into that. It's not a requirement for that. There was no requirement for a secondary access for Vintage Ranch too as well. So nexus-wise, there is no requirement for it. We just recognize that the fire department could possibly do that, and the fire department knows it. And the only reason I bring it up is in a discussion with the fire department, they just said, oh yeah, we'd be able to drive through there if we really had to. So it's that's really it. But there was no condition requiring it.
Well, I'm assuming they could drive through there today, but if one of the property owners to the north decided to block that road off, there'd be nothing to prohibit them doing it, is there?
Commissioner Cooney, yes, it would. They wouldn't be able to block it off because the fire department requires through to that property this property right here, because this is a legal parcel, so they could not impede access, because this right now is the legal access to this property, so they could not block off access to this property. So the access easement that the hostels have here goes all the way to the next public road. So no, they would not be able to block it off because they'd be blocking this off. And that legal access will still exist, but we will block it off for our residents in here, which we're allowed to, but he still could not block that off. And the fire department would not allow that because, that is still a legal access.
But the potential for access beyond the northern boundary of your parcel it's still theoretical as to whether the fire department could condition access through a gate or something to the north of that. It's not
Cooney,
really in place today.
Right, Commissioner Cooney, that is correct. The fire department hasn't given us any of those. We are acting in terms of our access requirements to meet Key Site Policy B1. So we are requiring, as part of a policy, not fire department action, all of our people must go south, because that's what allows them to rezone the property. So that's their restriction to be able to do that. To enforce policy Key Site B1, we are going to have to block this off for the owners here to go this way, but we don't want to stop access for the fire department.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Ms. Gerber.
Thank you. I spoke directly with Glenn Fiddler of County Fire about this issue. Once access is provided from the south, they have no requirement or interest in maintaining access from the north. They consider the cul-de-sac to be adequate as ingress and egress for the site, just for your information.
Okay. Well, I'm going to forget I heard anything about that access.
Well, just if I could chime in, I don't remember any fire department requiring a secondary access for 5 parcels, for 5 houses. They just don't require it. You have secondary access when you have 30 or 40 and you have concerns about someone having an accident in the roadway and blocking it, but you don't need secondary access for 5 parcels. they never require that. So.
Yeah, Chairman Kumi, Commissioner Blau, that is correct. That's why there's nothing in their letter. I would suspect my client would like to keep that open for emergency access because you always want as many ways for the fire department to get to your property, but there is no requirement there. We would just not want those people here to be able to be accessing that regularly, so that because we need to go south for their access to be in conformance with the Orchid Community Plan.
Okay, well, I think we've reduced that access to almost nothing with regard to this project that we're approving and recommending to the board. It's nice that it's there now, but who knows what one of your lot purchasers might want to do with his backyard, his or her backyard, that would make access through there difficult, if not impossible, and I don't see anything to prevent it in the conditions we have. My second condition concern is with regard to drainage, and I'll just ask you one question about that. In terms of flow onto the property from Vintage Ranch or any of the other undeveloped areas around, is there onflow from surrounding parcels?
Chairman Cooney, member of the commission, I'm going to have Russ Garrison come up to discuss drainage because he's the one that did our grading plan, and I think he'll be able to answer that.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning. Could we get your name?
I'm sorry, Russ Garrison, Bethel Engineering.
Okay.
Which one would you like?
That's fine.
Or do you want?
Yeah, go back to the aerial.
Oh, the aerial, I'm sorry.
There you go. Yeah, Mesa Verde, the Mesa Verde site drains, portions of that site drain to the, sorry, I don't even, the Mesa Verde homes here, the primary drainage for those is to their street. There is some backyard drainage that comes along here and drains out into this area. But our site is primarily the top of the hill. So this drops off into this direction. This is drained down here. We've got this gully. Vintage Ranch drains this direction and out down their portion of the Orchid Creek tributary. So this site is primarily its own site. Not a lot of on-site drainage on that, if that answers your question.
That does, thank you. But while you're here, let me ask my fellow commissioners if they have any current questions. Commissioner St. John.
Does in a big rain event like we had, and Orchid Creek fills, what happens to the gully in the top corner?
On our site?
Yes.
It's quite deep, actually, and Orchid Creek is not known to back up that far, so that wouldn't be an issue. We do also have setbacks from that. Flood control will require us that no improvement happen within a setback of that gully.
Do you know what the setback is?
I believe that they've got a 50-foot requirement from the top of bank, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll turn to public comment now, and we do have one speaker slip. Sarah? Is that Anaya?
Anaya, yes.
Okay, great. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm glad this picture's up here because that is my house right there with the circle driveway. And so if you came to visit the property this week, you probably came up my driveway and saw my two big Weimaraners and my 4 children. We purchased this home 2 years ago as our dream home to fix up. We do know the Hostels really well. They're our friends, and we were really excited that they had this 5-acre parcel here. We were hoping they were going to build a single family home on it. If you can kind of see, well, if you've visited the property, I would disagree that this is an urban development, because if you came up from Clark, we're surrounded, we have 4 acres right there, and we're surrounded by all of our friends who have 5-acre parcels, 10-acre parcels. There's horses, chickens, everything out there. It's a beautiful area of Orchid that I would love to see preserved if at all possible. We do have the Mesa Verde development here, and then behind it we did get the notice that Rice Ranch was going to be, it's called Vintage Ranch now, I guess, is going to be developing down there. But this Hossel property is kind of the 5-acre buffer to all of that, to just keep it all beautiful up there. And I'm also speaking on behalf of my neighbors. Our Mrs. Hunt is right next to us, and she is sick and put in a home recently, but was really against this as well. So I just wanted to let you know. We're happy to hear that the access would be from the south if this was to be approved, but that is our driveway that everyone has been driving up. And this morning I was a little disturbed because there were semis going up there dropping off seed containers to be clearing land, driving up our driveway. What was I going to say? So I just want to say that it's not surrounded by urban development. As you can see, the Jensen's crossing off Stillwell, that is, I mean, at least 10 acres away. That pretty much the only development right now is going to be in the south and to the south east, which is Mesa Verde. Besides that, as you drove up there, it's quiet, it's beautiful. That Orchid Creek too, I'm not an engineer, I'm a school counselor. I actually snuck away from my school right now. But that Orchid Creek did really fill up last year. I wanted to let you know. It was about a foot below that small little bridge down our driveway. Our driveway is the one that's lined with the white fence. And so I am, I guess, concerned about the water too. I was happy to hear, because one of our questions was, are you guys going to be using our road? And so I loved all the questions about the fire department and things like that. And if it's blocked off, that is a plus for us. But yeah, right now, from the pavement to this property is dirt, and that's where the semis have been driving on. So anyways, those are my concerns. I would ask you to, I don't know all this, but to not approve a rezone. I'd love for just 1 or 2 houses there to keep with a natural landscape. We're already being approached in by all of these housing developments already. And if we can keep that 5 acres as a buffer, it would be beneficial to us and all the neighbors as you drove from Clark.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for hearing me.
Go back to school.
Okay, thank you.
Any other public speakers on this project? I don't see any. So we'll bring it back to staff. Ms. Gerber, would you like to add anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would. So yesterday afternoon, we received some proposed condition language revisions for condition 1, 4, 5, 12, 19, and 27. And the proposed revisions from Mr. Swank are in front of you on a Xerox copy. We've looked at those more closely this morning and do have some changes we think would be necessary in light of Mr. Fry's statement that, you know, it's not, the changes to the conditions that you have in front of you, Mr. Swank did with the assumption that I think it would just be the 5 separate drainage basins. What we'd like to do is take maybe a 5 to 10 minute break or trail when you're done with your deliberation and just alter them a little bit so they can accommodate the project going either way, and the language is a little more flexible.
Well, I think it sounds extensive enough so that you're going to need a break time. We can move forward with the project to the point of answering all our questions, and then either move on to the next matter or take a quick break, and we'll see where you are at that point. We want it to be the way you recommend it before we recommend it to the board. Okay, anything else, Ms. Gerber, from the applicant's presentation or the public comment?
No, thank you.
Okay. Anything further, Commissioner Farini?
Thank you. For Ms. Gerber, In regard to what Ms. Anaya was talking about and the keeping it 5 acres and then we have these 5 1-acres, and it was discussed in the Orchid plan. Could you go over that a little bit so to clarify and expand a little?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Farini, I can, thank you. So in the Orchid Community Plan, there are these separate sections that address each key site. And each of the key site sections has specific policies and development standards that were adopted for those key sites. For this parcel within this key site, so key site B identifies this particular parcel as recommended to be rezoned from 2E1 to 1E1 if access can be taken from the south. So there's both a policy and a development standard that directs us to consider that. It doesn't say you must, but it directs us to consider that. I believe there's the policies are in your staff report. You can take a direct look at them. Let's try to find the page. Page 9, thank you. So both policy key site B1 and development standard key site B4 are there on page 9 on the left-hand side. This parcel is the one with the last 3 digits 065. So if you look at policy key site B1, down on the 5th line in the middle, and then a little farther down, 103-265, where it says the county shall consider redesignating, rezoning parcel 103-265 to residential 1E1 if access to all new development is provided from the south. And then that's reiterated that if feasible, access to the southern portion of the site shall be coordinated through key site 7 down below. So our project is consistent with these policies, but again, it's not directive. It directs us to consider it.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner St. John.
I have a question on a different topic. What is the condition, if any, on construction access, given the issue that was brought up by our public speaker?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner St. John, there's no specific condition that limits access. I think we just assumed, probably, maybe it would be good to add one, but I think we just assumed that all construction access would come from the south, as we are conditioning the installation of the road and cul-de-sac to the site concurrent with the first zoning clearance for the parcel. But we didn't have a specific condition that limits construction access.
Okay, thank you. And as a practical matter, not being a construction person, can you do that? In other words, I know you have to stage equipment and...
Commissioner Blau.
If you allow me, you're not going to be able to get a building permit until the fire department has access to the site through a paved road or an all-weather road. So the temporary access in the back would not qualify. They're going to require they get a fire truck there once you put lumber on site. So we don't need to condition it further here. The building department will do that for you.
I think I disagree, Commissioner Blau, that there is so much grading that is part of the project description that it would be a significant inconvenience to
Well,
the neighbors along the south.
Actually, I was going to comment on that. Initially, I'm thinking that as a requirement of the subdivision, once the road's installed, that they abandon that easement to the north, or if that's not agreeable to the applicant, then there should be a condition that the access could only be used as an emergency access to the fire department, and as a condition of the project, they're going to be required to either put the bollards in, or, but it would be, I'd rather see them abandon it entirely, because there's no need for it once you put the road into the south. The fire department doesn't need access, they're not asking for it, so either abandon the easement, so it's no longer a burden on the lady's property that spoke, or put up requirement there a bollard. So I would have a condition that says do one or the other as a condition of the recording the track map. Does that solve
Just
the
as
problem?
practical on that,
Pardon?
practical matter to that is, if you need an emergency access, if the fire department wanted to go in that way, nobody's going to stop them anyway. If you have it abandoned and they need it, they're going to use it.
You're right. There is. I'm just saying that we just want to make sure that it's not used for any other purpose, and I don't think the applicant's going to disagree with that. So, and quite frankly, if it were me, I'd abandon it because I think it's actually a burden on both properties. I'd just get rid of it so it doesn't show in the title report.
My concern is early on, before we're talking about selling parcels or building anything, there could be a significant amount of construction traffic connected to grading and preparing the site. And at this point, it sounded from Mr. Swank, and he can certainly clarify, they do have access across Vintage Ranch, and that approach by construction grading apparatus would be much preferable to coming up the existing easement. So I'd be looking personally for conditioning the project so that all grading equipment, all grading is access to the site from the south. Mr. Swank is approaching with that.
Chairman Cooney, members of the commission, we're satisfied with that. If you've ever been out on that road up there, her driveway, that bridge, there's no way construction equipment could even, it's too narrow, they couldn't even get up through there. So we always envision that construction is going to come from the south. It's the logical place where you start from your connection there anyhow. That was always the intent. Vintage Ranch was going to do the same thing. Depending on who comes first, that road goes in first, whether it's them or us. So we're fine with that. That's our full intent, is to come from the south.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Ms. Gerber, you're noting that additional condition, and we'd like to look at that one too.
I am, thank you. And I've actually noted two. One is if your commission agrees that once the road is installed, the easement shall either be abandoned or used solely for fire department access. And then the other one is that all construction traffic shall occur from the south through Vintage Ranch.
Perfect. Commissioner St. John.
Should it be fire department or emergency? I mean, if there was a flood of the creek, does...
Okay. Let's see if I had anything else. All right, so we have a project we'd like to move along today for the benefit of the applicant. We have some fuzziness around the conditions, which Ms. Gerber suggests they can take care of today. So I think we should deliberate, but hold off a vote until we see the condition language. Okay?
I have one more question for Ms. Gerber.
Please.
I just want to make sure, because there's a lot of easements that have to happen and be recorded, and there's timing issues. So there's the easements for the drainage, there's the easements for the public utilities. Can you point me to the easement for actually using Claret Lane in the in the conditions? Because that's obviously vital.
Let me help you. The condition actually reads that they have to physically have the easement recorded before this goes to the Board of Supervisors, so that an easement will be in place, signed by the adjacent property owner, and already recorded at the county recorder's office.
Okay, which page is that on? I'm just not seeing it.
Let me find it for you.
Okay, thank you.
Condition number 39, which is at the bottom of page B16. Oops, that's for drainage, sorry. I know we mentioned it.
Actually, that may have one that you added, because if I remember right, David called me and said, by the way, they're doing this condition, it's unusual. Normally, you don't require the easement to be in place prior to going to the board, but I think you're adding that condition now. So it may be one that you need to modify as well and add to it.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I don't believe it's a condition of approval because it'll, by the time the project is actually approved, that easement will already be recorded. So at that point, having a condition of approval would not be warranted. It's just a requirement moving forward to go up to the board that that easement be in place. And at that point in time, there would be no need to have a condition, if that makes sense.
So how do we make sure that happens? Do we put it as part of our motion?
Well, as staff, we've indicated to the applicant that we will not carry their project forward to the board until that easement is in place. So you could include it in your motion. I'm not sure that that's necessary. Perhaps council has some thoughts on any appropriate action or direction from your commission on that part.
Chair Cooney, Commissioners, I think it would be appropriate to include it in your motion if you want to.
And I would agree with that, because the problem is that if we don't, the staff could subsequently decide that it wasn't a requirement and take it to the board anyway. So I think you're right in adding it to the conditions of approval that the easement will be recorded prior to. We're recommending that it being provided prior to the board taking an action to approve the map of the zone change.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, would you want to include that in your motion rather than in a condition, perhaps?
That's what we're looking at, is to include it with the motion so that the staff is directed to pass that along as part of our recommendation to the board. Slightly separate, and I know we're throwing a lot on you to draft, Ms. Gerber, but you have strong support in Mr. Tuttle to help you with that. But I have a question with regard to, as I read the project conditions, and I'm looking at condition 5 with regard to maintenance, Mr. Swank said that this wouldn't be subject to a homeowners association requirement. So we've got individual CC&Rs that would be approved by agencies of the county and county council that would be attached to each parcel. But the question I have is enforcement. I would want the CC&Rs to have the county in a position to enforce those in the event of breach of the maintenance provisions. For example, if the project's 5 years down the road and 4 of the 5 owners are taking care of, or at least putting up funds to provide for paving the road, and 1 refuses, are we dependent on the neighbors to enforce that, or would the county be able to be a party to enforce in the event the condition is not satisfied? Mr. Tuttle.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, as that condition reads currently, it's that the applicant shall record CC&Rs or other satisfactory legal instrument. Regardless of what document is used to record those maintenance requirements, it is still a condition of approval that those facilities be maintained. So I don't believe the legal documents have to identify the county as a party or stakeholder in that. The conditions are still conditions of approval that run with the property. So the county would still be in a position to have enforcement responsibilities in the event the facilities aren't maintained.
Over and above the CC&Rs?
Regardless of whatever future status of the CC&Rs or other legal document.
Oh, that's fine. I know the county doesn't like to get into enforcing private agreements, so having it clearly conditioned that the CC&Rs have to provide it is probably as far as we need to go. Okay, what else? Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, I was just going to point out too, because this is 5-lot subdivision, you are subject to the Department of Real Estate's white reports, and they have to approve this. They're going to approve your CC&Rs and other documents prior to anybody purchasing a lot. Believe me when I tell you, they're a lot tougher on those issues than we are. So I have no concern. I mean, you could have a neighbor that doesn't want to pay their fair share. The remedies are pretty simple. You go to court and you force them to get to make his payment. It's no different than a commercial subdivision or a commercial, venture where you've got multiple owners in a parking lot, that sort of thing. So,
could we just get confirmation? I was under the impression this was not going to be supervised by the state, but it was suggested by Mr. Swank that it's a 4-lot subdivision, and for that reason,
no, for DRA purposes, this is a 5-lot subdivision. You got one lot that you're now dividing into 5. You are required to it. The only way you would not be is if in a city, not in the county, and you deliver a house, you're not required to get CC or get white reports on those properties now. But if you're selling the bare land and it's 5 lots or more, you are required to get a white report. This I know for a fact.
Okay. Well, I'm not questioning that, but we're a little bit of an ambiguous area as far as the involvement of the State Department of Real Estate. Mr. Swank, is your understanding correct, or is it in agreement with what Commissioner Blau has indicated?
Chairman Cooney, members of the commission, yeah, that's correct. Hostile Builders utilizes a legal instrument in numerous jurisdictions for their small lot subdivisions that they use to create these maintenance agreements that are recorded. What we have to do is that's one of the reasons why the staff put the flexibility of what kind of document is used. This does have to go to BRA. County Council has to review and approve the mechanisms. As part of those mechanisms, there is, of course, an infrastructure component to it. There is a financing, and there is an enforcement provision that's included in those. So it is a requirement of map recordation that not only the BRE but also County Council has to approve that this is viable, and they have used it in multiple jurisdictions. That's what they intend to do here.
So it is subject to the oversight of the Department of Real Estate at
Chairman
the state level.
Correct. This is a 5-lot subdivision.
Good. Thank you. Okay. How would you like to proceed? Commissioner Farini, this is a 4th District item.
Well, however we all want to move forward with it, I think we had talked about trailing it, and then you discussed not voting on it until we heard all of the language. Just up front, I support the project. It looks like that's what the Orchid Community Plan had envisioned, and a lot of time was spent back then coming up with the plan. We have discussed updating the plan, and we know that that's kind of on a back burner as far as funding and timing. But this is the project before us today. It was envisioned into the site. I think it would be a good use. I also think that it's a nice transition. So we're going from some fairly high-density housing then to lower density and then out to the 5 and 10 acres. I support Commissioner St. John's additions and she was discussing earlier, and I think we need to work that language out. So I'm ready to move forward when my commission.
When we have the condition language, okay. Anyone else want to make comments, pro or con? Commissioner Blau?
Yeah, I just want to comment on flood control. I tend to agree with John Fry that in my view, the state has made a terrible decision doing the Clean Water Act that they're doing. I would much rather see regional retarding basins that are owned by the city or owned by the county, because you do have control of that. Unfortunately, the state water people have taken a different approach. And I argued for a good 12 hours with the engineer that they hired to come down here and explain it all to us. And it was of no avail. They're going to do it their way, and that's all there is to it. It makes sense for lots of other communities. For Santa Maria, it doesn't make real good sense because we've got a real strong retarding basin system that's working real well. There's also two thoughts engineers have. One is they like to hold the water, retain it, gently let it flow out. The other engineering theory is make the pipes big enough to get all the water out now and not be holding it back. I prefer that method, and a lot of engineers I deal with prefer that method, but that's not what we have. But at any rate, they are going to have to comply with the new State Clean Water Act, and to do it in the individual basins is going to be much more efficient, less costly than if they had to do it both ways. Because even if we did the regional shared retarding basin or retention basin, it does not eliminate the requirement to do the on-site retardation that's required by the new Clean Water Act. So I'm glad it gives them flexibility. If for some reason it doesn't work, they can do the other basin, but I'm quite sure they won't. And I actually think it'll be a much better looking project by having small depressions in your lawn areas, what it's going to amount to, as opposed to a big earthen swales and all that sort of thing at the end of the project. So that's the reason I brought it up. But I couldn't see the reason for a 5-year bond. It made no sense to me when I read through it. So I'm glad he was able to get it changed, and I'm glad Mr. Fry is in agreement. So I'm ready to support the project when we come back.
Commissioner St. John, any comment?
It just seems like I was glad that Chair Cooney raised the issue of the CCNRs, or however we're going to enforce this going forward, particularly with the decision on the retention basins. There's more responsibility potentially on the 5 owners if it goes that way, and for ongoing maintenance. So, and it's a private road, and living in an area with a private road, I know there can be issues. So I think that's an important component. So I'm glad that that it's an enforceable condition that runs with the land, and that will work for us. So it does seem, I know it's hard for the public to let go of the open space and the trees and the less dense. At least it is, I agree with Commissioner Farini, it is a transition to the really dense development that's going to be around into the south. So I think with all these conditions that Ms. Gerber's writing quickly, it will be a better project. So I think I will be satisfied with those. We'll wait to hear the language.
What I propose is that we take a 10-minute break now, and if Ms. Gerber's ready with condition language, we could move forward at that time. But if not, she could continue working on that while we take up item 2. And if item 2 is still going when she's ready, we might be able to interrupt. But we'll keep moving with our agenda. So for now, let's say we'll be back at a couple of minutes before 11 o'clock. We're back on the record. This is the Santa Barbara County Planning Commission meeting of the 11th of October 2017. And just before we took our break, we asked staff to work on conditions for item number 1, the Halso track map. And I understand from staff that they did come up with some revisions for us to consider. So, Ms. Gerber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our first revision is on page 3 of your staff report. Under the line that says your commission's motion should include the following, we're inserting a new number 1. All the others would be numbered sequentially, then 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the new number 1 says, direct staff to confirm recordation of easements for access and utilities prior to review by the Board of Supervisors. The new number 5 now says, recommend that the Board of Supervisors approve case number 15 TRM4, subject to the conditions included as attachment B of the staff report dated September 21st, 2017, as modified at the hearing of October 11th, 2017. The next change is on page B1, immediately following your findings. We're now in the conditions of approval. On that page, the third paragraph, which begins grading and drainage. The third line, the second line, grading for the proposed private access driveway and retention basin, parentheses, S, and parentheses, will be approximately 9,310 cubic yards of cut and 988 cubic yards of fill. Stormwater runoff from the access driveway, and then we're deleting and turnaround will be collected by a bioretention system and conveyed by a storm drain to a retention basin at the north side of lots 1 and 2. So that will now read, stormwater runoff from the access driveway and from the 5 proposed lots will be accommodated on each proposed parcel or by a centralized retention basin. On page B2, condition 4, MM2 AEST SP1 stormwater retention basin, parentheses S and parentheses. The use of perimeter fencing and insert on drainage basins shall be avoided to the maximum extent feasible. Where required, perimeter fencing shall be of a decorative nature. Any perimeter landscaping shall consist of low-maintenance trees and shrubs, as well as turf, etc. Maintenance shall be strike determined and insert required through recordation of CCNRs, and then nothing else has changed. On page B3, MM Map 7 CCR maintenance, item A, simply say stormwater retention basin, parentheses S and parentheses. On page B7, the agent had suggested changes to this condition, but we're retaining it as is because it's applicable both ways. On page B10 at the bottom, mitigation measure 17, that's condition 19. We'll now read, owner applicant shall provide a retention basin or basins designed to retain, infiltrate, and or recharge all runoff water on site. On page B14, condition 27. This one now reads, the access driveway, comma, and retention basin, and insert if centralized to serve the 5 lots, comma, shall be constructed in association with the first residential development on the property. The application for the first residential development on the property shall include construction of the access driveway and retention basin if centralized to serve the 5 lots. Site and grading plans submitted with the zoning clearance application shall include these features. Grading inspectors and flood control personnel shall verify that access and centralized retention basin, if applicable, are installed in accordance with approved plans. And then finally, 2 more. Condition number 58, flood control water agency letter dated June 17th, 2017. We're going to revise that to October 10th, 2017. And then finally, we have a new condition, number 65, which reads, upon issuance of first grading permit for development, all access, comma, including construction traffic, comma, shall be taken through Key Site 7 to the south. This restriction does not apply to access for emergency purposes. We believe this satisfies the request both for limitation of future access from the north and limitation of construction access. And those are all the changes.
Any questions regarding the changes from Ms. Gerber? I don't want to rush you, Commissioner St. John. Are you still looking at them? Could I draw your attention to one condition that the use of language concerned me? Ms. Gerber, I know how careful you are about all of the environmental conditions, but in condition 10, which I understood this has to do with the oak trees, and the standard condition that deceased trees are replaced in a manner consistent with county standards. You use the term if, or it says where oak trees are killed, and I hadn't seen that language in a condition before. I was trying to think how we would enforce that. Would we have to show intent, or could it be done as a reduced level of murder? I'm hopeful that we could come up with a different wording for that than where oak trees are killed. I guess you're trying to distinguish from oak trees lost through no fault of the developer.
Well, actually, Mr. Chair, this condition language came directly from the OCP EIR and the OCP mitigation language. I'd be very open to any suggestions. I don't think we necessarily, how about removed, or we weren't really trying to distinguish between intentional murder and accidental tree side. How about removed or significantly damaged?
Fine. That sounds fine.
The agent has also suggested impacted by development. Would you prefer one or the other?
Yours, I think, just because it's broader. as I think Mr. Swank explained to me in our telephone conversation, the goal here is to remove as few trees as possible, and the change of the drainage solution may materially assist in that regard. So I'm hopeful that we won't have any further need for this condition, but going forward, as you say, we look back at prior language when we approve future projects, so I'm happy with that. Okay, Commissioner Farini, are you ready to make a motion?
Yes, I am. So I would like my motion to be that we move forward with this project. We follow staff's recommendations on their staff report, starting on page 2 and going forward, that we also incorporate in all of the changes and additions that were just added by staff. And I missed anything there? We're good? Thank you.
I'll second that.
Okay, the motion is to take the action listed on page 3 of our staff report as amended today, and with the additional and revised condition language outlined by staff. Let's have a roll call vote on this.
Commissioner Blau.
Aye.
Commissioner Farini.
Aye.
Commissioner St. John.
Aye.
Chair Cooney.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Swank. As usual, a great job, and we're sure that the Board of Supervisors will agree with us. Okay, let's go to item number 2. Mr. Villalobos.
The following is a hearing on the request of Don Pepe, agent for the owners. Consider case number 17 LLA2, application filed on March 16, 2017 for approval of a lot line adjustment and to determine that the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to section 15305A of the state guidelines for the implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
Chair Cooney, if I may
Mr. Wilson,
interrupt.
surely.
Before we begin, I'd like to, if it's appropriate, I'd like to introduce Gwen as a planner into our division. So we're excited that Gwen came on earlier this year, and this is her first Planning Commission presentation. So I wanted to introduce her to the Commission today and say that we're excited to have her on board, and you'll be seeing more of her presentations going forward.
Welcome, Ms. Von Clan. Is that how you pronounce it, Von Clan?
Von Clan, yes.
Okay, great.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Good morning, Planning Commission. As Mr. Wilson stated, I will be presenting the Schaefer-Musio lot line adjustment. We'll start off with a vicinity map. As you can see on the slide, the project is located on Drum Canyon Road, roughly halfway between Los Alamos and Highway 246 in the 3rd District. Here's a closer view of the project. The project site is comprised of 2 parcels of roughly 275 acres combined. These are the lot boundaries. The project is located in a rural area in the Ag 2 100 zone. Current agricultural uses include cattle grazing, hay farming, and dry farming. The surrounding parcels have similar zones and uses. Note that the project is divided by Drum Canyon Road, which you can see is this red line bisecting the lot. Here's a close-up of the existing lot configuration, now with the north arrow pointing toward the right of the slide. You can see, as on the previous slide, that Drum Canyon Road in red bisects the 2 existing lots. And here is the existing lot boundary between the 2 lots. There are 3 wells that I've numbered for this discussion, and all of the wells are located on parcels that are under the same ownership. Ag well number 1 serves the agricultural operations on both lots on the areas that are west of Drum Canyon Road, up here. Domestic well number 2 serves the domestic uses and cattle grazing on the areas of both lots east of Drum Canyon Road. Domestic well number 3 serves an off-site parcel. And here is the proposed lot configuration. The applicant is requesting the lot line adjustment in order for the lot boundaries to align more closely to the existing agricultural operations and the roadways. And you can see that the proposed lot boundary follows Drum Canyon Road. Ag well number 1 would continue to serve the agricultural operations on proposed lot 2, and domestic well number 2 would continue to serve the domestic uses and cattle grazing on proposed lot 1. And here's a snapshot of the existing versus the proposed lot boundaries. The existing configuration shows lot 2 being non-conforming to the minimum acreage of the Ag 2100 zone. However, after the lot line adjustment, both parcels would conform. Currently, both lots are under Williamson Act contract, and both lots would remain under contract after the lot line adjustment. As proposed, the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to Section 15305A, minor alterations in land use limitations. The lot line adjustment would not result in the creation of a new parcel or any changes in land use. The project is consistent with the Comprehensive Plan, County Land Use and Development Code, and Chapter 21. In conversations with the county surveyor, the surveyor suggested revised wording for condition number 8 that is more accurate to the county processing of a lot line adjustment. The new condition language clarifies that the applicant should pay all fees prior to recording of grant deeds and certificate of conformity. Staff recommends that this change be made to this condition. In conclusion, staff recommends that you make the required findings for approval, determine the project is exempt from CEQA, approve the project subject to the conditions included as Attachment B and as revised at today's hearing. This concludes staff's presentation. If you have any questions, staff is available to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, I have a question. I have not heard of recording a grant deed in conjunction with a lot line adjustment, so maybe someone could explain to me what that condition means and why we're doing it. There's no conveyance here, I wouldn't think. I mean, we're just simply reorganizing the legal boundary for the two parcels, but maybe I'm wrong.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Blau, thank you for your question. So the surveyor's suggestion was that when the county is processing a lot line adjustment, that can be done through granting a deed or a certificate of conformity. And I'd also like to say that my supervisor, John Zorovich, or the applicant may be able to provide more insight into that question.
Okay.
Mr. Zorovich, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Blau. Admittedly, that was a little interesting wording to me as well, but that was wording that the condition wording changes was originally brought up, I think, by the applicant. And in discussing it with this county surveyor, he agreed that a deed is the way in which lot line adjustments through, he was indicating in the MAP Act, is the proper way to do it in conformity. So I don't have much more background than that, but that was his preference on how we then finalize the lot line adjustment recordation process.
Got to tell you, I've been doing this for 40 years. I don't know how many lot line adjustments I've prepared, and I've never recorded a grant deed if I've got the same owner. So I think he's actually confused as to what we're doing here. I've never heard of or seen a grant deed prepared in accordance with a lot adjustment, unless I have seen it when we have different ownerships. I mean, if parcel 2 and parcel 1 has different owners, then I could see where you'd want to do that, because you'd be granting a portion of each parcel to the other owner. But if it's the same owner and it's a contiguous piece of property, I don't get it, but I don't think it does any damage. I just don't know how he's going to comply with it or what he's going to do. So, but maybe it is different owners. I could be wrong, but I just don't get it.
We can ask the applicant about the the downside of doing it that way, but for now, we have a condition that requires it. Any other questions for staff before we go to the applicant? I was remiss in not asking up front about ex parte communications. Commissioner St. John?
I made a site visit on Sunday, October 8th.
Anything further from the rest? Okay, nothing further. Thank you. The applicant, Mr. Poppe. Welcome.
Good morning, Chair, including members of the Planning Commission. I'm Donald Poppe. I'm here representing Mr. Schaefer and Joseph and Cynthia Musio for the lot line adjustment. First off, I'd like to thank staff for their excellent job working together with us on this project, and I can happily say that probably working with staff has been the easiest part of this project. In regards to the overall site, as you have seen, the site is split by Drum Canyon. The original lot line is actually a Rancho lot line and was created prior to Drum Canyon Road. Drum Canyon Road now bisects the agricultural operations there. While the property is jointly owned by the Schaefers and the Musios actually manage the east side, and Mr. Schaefer manages the west side, and in fact accesses the remainder of his properties across that piece. So adjusting that lot line to Drum Canyon Road is in conformance with the actual agricultural operations going on there. In regards to Commissioner Plow's question, in this case, the record of survey is perhaps a much older way of finalizing a lot line adjustment, and based on a lawsuit many years ago, the courts found that record of surveys can't be required as part of that. The actual document that the county specifically requires is a certificate of conformity that's required, in which has the new legal descriptions in it and is the finalizing document. It's very typical in cases, as Commissioner Plow stated, where we have separate owners, that there does have to be grant deeds that are exchanged as part of that. In this particular case, the grant deeds will be exchanged simply because of the fact that while the property is currently, the parcels are currently jointly owned, the intention is that after the lot line adjustment, Mr. Schaefer will own the west side and the Musios will own the east side, which is basically how they're currently managing and operating the property. With that, if you have any questions in regards to the application or to the lot line adjustment, I'm happy to answer them, but otherwise I'll keep it short and simple.
Do we have questions for Mr. Poppe?
No,
Commissioner
that explains it, although it's probably should be a quitclaim deed that they each execute to the other, but grant deeds and quitclaims could be, both could be used. But that explains why the condition is for the deeding, because you are going to change the ownership once the lot line adjustment's done. So I'm not sure that should be a requirement of the surveyor, to tell you the truth. That's more a requirement between the two owners, but you know, it's as long as it's your intention to do that anyway. I don't care if the condition's in there or not. It's fine.
Any other questions? Commissioner St. John has none. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Poppe. Are there any public speakers for this matter? No. Okay. Then we come back to staff. Anything, Ms. Van Clan, you'd like to add?
Mr. Chair, we have no comment. Thank you.
Okay. Perfect. So, Commissioner St. John, are you ready for a motion? Would you like discussion? How would you like to proceed?
I'm ready to make a motion unless fellow commissioners have comments. It seems pretty straightforward to me. Going out to the site, it makes all the sense in the world. And I understand what the two owners would like to do. So I will move approval of the staff recommendation in the staff report
Page
dated
2.
Okay, in our packet today.
Yeah, page 2 is where the recommendations are set forth.
Yes, okay, to make the required findings for approval of the project specified in attachment A of the staff report, including the CEQA finding, determine the project's exempt from environmental review pursuant to the CEQA guidelines, and approve the project subject to the conditions of approval included in attachment B.
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Farini. Thank you. Could we, any further discussion? Commissioner Blau? No? Okay, let's have a roll call vote. Thank you.
Commissioner Blau.
Aye.
Commissioner Farini.
Aye.
Commissioner St. John.
Aye.
Chair Cooney.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
All right, Mr. Poppy, thank you very much. And staff, Ms. Von Clan, great job. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Mr. Wilson, you and I spoke about passing out a document. I see Mr. Villalobos doing that. Why don't you tell us what it is?
Thank you, Chair Cooney. During the hearing today, we did receive a list of potential topics for the joint meeting between the Agricultural Advisory Committee and the County Planning Commission. We'd like to hand that out today, and if there's any discussion on these proposed topics, additions, removals, we would be ready to get your feedback as we go ahead and prepare for that joint meeting.
Commissioner Blau.
Well, I see number 6 down here, and it's the importance of short-term rentals in Egg 1 and Egg 2 zones. Didn't the board just kill all that last week or this week? Why would we talk about that? I mean, I agree. I'd love to talk about it because I think the board made a terrible mistake, but it's not going to change what the board did. I just wonder what the rest of them I can see, yeah, but that one I'm not sure was discussed.
Commissioner Farini.
So does that mean we'll just take that one off? Just tell them there's no sense talking about it? And it's going to be hard to cover all of this anyway,
Yeah.
I think. So we're going to have to keep things down a little bit.
Any other revisions, or I think what's most important is if anybody has anything to add. It's not that this is the final item, the final time to consider it, but for example, Commissioner Farini, we will rely on you for coming up with any other issues that you've come across in your time on the Planning Commission that may be worthwhile to discuss with the Ag Advisory Committee.
The only thing looking at this, I think this is a great starting point for us, and there again, we only have so much time. And maybe we're going to have other meetings annually. We'll see how that goes. But if we were to prioritize this, I know that the farm worker housing is a really big deal right now as immigration enforcement changes throughout time. There's a federal H-2A is a way you bring workers in, and it's where to house them is the stopping point. So I think from where I stand, I would like to see 3 move to 1, and I don't know if this was a priority list or was just something that they threw out, but I'd like to make sure we do get that one covered.
Great. That's a good starting point, and the list is certainly good. I think, as Commissioner Farini indicated, time is going to be our limiting factor, but you might suggest to the committee that they add a priority in terms of the items so that if we can't cover everything, we at least get to the ones they consider most important.
Thank you, Chair Cooney and members of the Commission. Appreciate the comments.
All right. Nothing further then. We'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.